Hi, everybody. Thank you for being with me. We're going to talk about Christian nationalism today. And Christian nationalism, remember, is not a religious movement. It is a political movement. So let's first of all make some real basics clear. We are not a Christian nation. We are a religiously pluralistic nation. And our founders were very clear about this. In America, they said people could be any religion they wanted to be, or even if they wanted to worship, they could worship or not worship, and if they did worship in any way they chose. That is our constitutional basis. Of course, the first 10 amendments of the U.S. Constitution are called the Bill of Rights, and the very first one says, among other things, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Now, religious minorities are therefore protected in America. We are a majority Christian nation, and that's fine. We're a majority Christian nation. But that doesn't mean that we are, quote unquote, a Christian nation. We are a religiously pluralistic nation. Now, since the 1970s, there's been a movement afoot, and this movement is called Christian nationalism. And the Christian nationalists believe that Christianity should be the dominant religion in American society. And now this is very, very significant. They have a theory, this premise that they call the Seven Mountain premise. And this is spheres of societal influence that they say only Christians should dominate. Religion, family, education, government, media, business, and arts and entertainment. Right? So there have actually been political leaders who were Jewish, for instance, and were told by a Christian nationalist, it is not legitimate for you to be there because you are a Christian. It was legitimate for him to be there because he was elected in a democratic society based on constitutional principles. So, in response to this, a lot of times, we've talked a lot recently about how at a time when hate is shouting, it's not enough for love to whisper. A lot of times people, because the religious life is internal and has to do with what's going on inside, a lot of people, when it comes to their own religious experience, don't want to be out there talking about it. And they don't want to be talking about it in politics, and they theoretically shouldn't have to either. Except right now what's happening is that this Christian nationalist message is so loud that many progressive Christians are feeling like, no, we've got to make the message really clear, because the Christian nationalist message is, according to many progressive Christians, not a message of Christ at all. So that's what we're here to talk about today, and I have a great guest with us, and that is Brandan Robertson. To full disclosure here, he's also a friend of mine as well as an honored colleague. He is an author, activist, and public theologian, currently serving as the pastor of Sunnyside Reformed Church in New York City. He's been called the TikTok pastor. His content has received more than 10 million views, and his work has been featured in Time Magazine, CNN, and the Washington Post. You can find out more about him at brandanrobertson.com. That's Brandan, Brandan. And I'm so excited to have him here. Hey, Brandan, thank you for being with us and being willing to discuss some of this with our audience. First of all, what about the things that I said so far? Yes? Are they?
Yeah,
Is that
absolutely.
I see things? Okay.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you so much because I appreciate that in this moment, you pointed out that there is a growing progressive Christian resistance, and I think there's a great need for that, of course. But this resistance to Christian nationalism needs to be a whole American resistance. I think,
Well,
yes, we've
hello,
heard.
Jew here. I agree with that.
Exactly. And so I think it's so important for you to be raising your voice, and thanks for giving a platform to voices like mine.
Sure. Let's start, though, with a specifically Christian aspect, because people hear the term Christian nationalist. One woman was criticizing me online, and she said something like, the founders were Christian nationalists. I said they very much were not Christian nationalists. So talk to me about Christianity as in the teachings of Christ,
Yeah.
and that the relationship of the teachings of Christ to the political movement of Christian nationalism.
Totally. Well, I mean, when we start looking at American history, it's a little ironic because if most Christian nationalists read what people like George Washington or Thomas Jefferson said about Christianity, Christian nationalists would not consider them Christian because they were very modernistic in their way of understanding Christianity. Thomas Jefferson, for instance, has his Jefferson Bible where he removes all supernatural elements and just
Yeah,
has the
I have
moral
it sitting
teachings
on
of
my
Christianity.
table.
Yeah. So it's really profoundly interesting that there's this revisionist history happening, trying to revise what our founding fathers actually believed. And from a biblical perspective, the message and mission of Jesus was never to conquer nations. Jesus transformed the world through one subversive act of love love at a time, and explicitly said, "My kingdom is not of this world, and therefore my servant shouldn't be fighting imperial battles, but instead should be seeking to change people's hearts and minds as a way of transforming society." And Christian nationalism is pretty explicitly saying that the way of Jesus is not effective. They're not liking the time and the energy it takes to actually share the good news of God's love with people that can transform their hearts and minds and thus then transform the nation. Instead, as you pointed out, they're aiming to go for the biggest power centers of our society, whether that's entertainment or government or education or any of the other ones, and trying to, from the top down, force people to align with Christianity. And the last thing I'll say there is it's been really ironic. There's one leader in the Christian nationalist movement named Doug Wilson, and he
I
has a
was going to ask you about him.
yeah, I actually interviewed him probably 15 years ago on my old podcast, and he's really evolved in his radicalness, but he's not even interested anymore in actually making people authentic Christians, meaning believing what he believes. He started using language of cultural Christianity, forcing people to be enculturated into what he says is a Christian culture, which is just frankly a white, cisgender, heterosexist, patriarchal worldview. And he wants to make Americans be forced to perform Christianity whether or not they believe it. And so it's a really interesting
So let's
goalpost.
be, yeah, as long as you mentioned him, he wants to repeal the 19th Amendment,
Yeah,
right? I mean, he really does want a Christian theocracy.
absolutely. And I mean, that's surprising in and of itself. Again, 10 years ago, the far right conservative Christians held the Constitution as near to Scripture. They wanted to uphold the Constitution and uphold the basic principles of American democracy. Today, they're saying we don't want First Amendment rights. We do want to change the Constitution fundamentally. There's been an evolution because they are explicitly moving towards, as you said, theocracy rather than just even
Pluralism.
Christianizing culture. Yeah.
Right. So I think a lot of people, so many people today are just like, what's happening? And I think that all of this is very clarifying. So you've got the white supremacists, you've got the Christian nationalists, and then, of course, you have the techno Curtis Yarvin, Peter Thiel gang, and they're basically they're loosely associated, or at least loosely allies, and they have one common goal, really, and that is the disruption, the complete undermining and sabotage of the constitutional system as it now exists, which has been the core basis for all progress in American history. And the question right now is whether or not we're willing to give that up. So how convenient to call themselves Christian
Yeah.
nationalists. First of all, nationalism, there's a difference between patriotism and nationalism. This whole idea that God loves any religion more than he loves any other is, I believe, spiritually unsound. The idea that God loves any nation more than he loves any other is spiritually unsound, because the idea that God loves any person more than any other is spiritually unsound, if in fact his is the love for all people unconditionally, because he knows us as we were created, which is perfect and in his image. So let's stay right now, before we get into the specifically political part, talk to me about the teachings of Jesus and how you think that they relate to considerations that should be given to public policy.
Yeah, I mean, what sometimes confuses folks when they hear us progressive Christians speak is I'm very willing to say that Jesus' message was a political message, politics meaning the affairs of the people. Jesus literally was preaching against a authoritarian empire in his day and trying to help
That's
liberate
right.
his people. That's what a Jewish Messiah was supposed to be.
Yeah, Jews were oppressed at that time by the Romans, and he was. That's what many of his followers wanted in a Messiah, was someone who would save them, and not just his followers, the Jews before he emerged, and many Jews today. Where's the Messiah? Where's the Messiah? And
Yeah.
of course, the Christians said the Messiah came. The Jews are saying the Messiah is still coming, and Einstein said, well, there is no time. So when you look at these things metaphysically, this is beyond time. The notion of the real Savior of humanity, which is a whole metaphysical conversation that is slightly different. But I think what you're saying is so important, that the Jews were waiting for a Messiah, meaning someone who would break the yoke of oppression that was being perpetrated against them by the Romans.
Yeah,
So go on.
exactly. When Jesus
So in
began,
that sense, it was very much, he was saying, this is how to free ourselves.
right. And I think what actually happened and gave way to Christian nationalism was that Christianity began diluting the political nature of Jesus' message, making it just a spiritual or just a theological message about believing things to be saved from hell when you die, when actually Jesus talked about making God's kingdom manifest on earth as it is in heaven. Now, I want to be clear here, because that is similar language to what a Doug Wilson or a Christian nationalist will use. But the difference is the way Jesus brought about the kingdom, as a Christian, I believe, is through empowering individuals to build communities where they serve their neighbors, where they resist empire, not through violence, not through domination, but through acts of love and service. Again, Christian nationalists know that that's true, but they also recognize that that is not securing them the power and privilege and influence that they want. And so you create a
Bingo.
different kind of Jesus.
Bingo. So let's look at some of the specifics. We're supposed to heal the sick.
Yeah.
Hello. We're supposed to feed the hungry. Hello. We're supposed to help the poor. Hello. We're supposed to be good to the stranger, right? Now, if you think about those things alone in terms of their relevance to public policy, we would be a radically different world. Wasn't it Gandhi who said, what do you think about a Christian nation? He said, it would be lovely. Is that what he said? It would be,
Yeah.
wouldn't that be nice? Meaning if people were really standing on love as the first and foremost principle. I mean, if you say love one another and you apply that to your own personal life, I think that that's where things got kind of funky. And you're talking about it in terms of leaving out the politics. I have always felt that, which is, if the question we are to ask is, am I being loving? And am I being good? And am I serving my neighbor? And am I helping the poor? And am I feeding, the hungry and healing the sick and doing what I can to be good to the stranger because you were a stranger in the land of Egypt and so forth? If that is a consideration for me to give to my personal life, I've always felt like all the public policy is our collective behavior. Why wouldn't we apply it to public policy, right?
Exactly.
You were going to say something.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think the thing that's remarkable, though, is that when Jesus was doing his ministry, he wasn't doing it on the basis of people's national identities. In fact, the Gospel's full of examples of Jesus crossing scandalous ethnic and relational and racial borders. And he wasn't doing it on religious boundaries either. Jesus obviously was a Jew, but he ministered to Samaritans, he ministered to Gentiles. Christian nationalism is revising Jesus. And one thing that might just be helpful is, I think there's two Jesuses in the New Testament, right? There's the Jesus of the Gospels, and then there's this Jesus of the book of Revelation, which is a very interesting figure. Jesus of the Gospels sought to bring peace to the world through acts of love. The Jesus of Revelation comes back on a white horse to wage war against his enemies. Now, I think that if Revelation's properly interpreted, that is a text of an oppressed group of Christians longing for Jesus to come back and liberate them from an oppressive empire. But it's not actually a prophecy of what Jesus is going to do. It's not a reflection of who the historical Jesus was. But unfortunately, the nationalist movement has disregarded the four Gospels, which are the foundation of Christianity, and elevated this guy on a great white horse coming back to wage war against his enemies. And they want the powerful rather than the meek and mild. They want the one who's going to wage literal violence instead of the one who said, turn the other cheek and bless your enemies. And so this is an inherent conversation within Christianity. It's a tension that has always existed, but it couldn't be clearer that the authentic way of Jesus was always the way of service and love and asking, what does love require of me? But again, since about Constantine's time, a lot of Christians have not been very happy with the Jesus way of transforming the world through love and have sought domination and this conquering figure to come back.
Well, this is so interesting because, of course, Stephen Miller at the Charlie Kirk rally, funeral service memorial, did talk about we are the people of God and we will wage retribution. So that's really what you're talking about there, right? The Jesus. So how do you, and first of all, I've never understood that because I know he was raised Jewish. Has he converted to Christianity? I wonder. I don't.
I
'Cause
think you have to be a part of the MAGA movement. You have to at least
yeah.
bow your hat to Christian ideas in order to fit
Okay.
in. Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you, so how do you in your own mind as a Christian theologian, how do you see so there's the Jesus of the four Gospels, which is all about love one another, forgiveness, mercy, all of the wonderful things we've talked about. And then the Jesus in the book of Revelations, how do you square that? Where do you go with that in your own mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's actually radically simple, and I've been saying this a lot on a tour I've been on recently, and it's just been good to see people's eyes open when they recognize this. The entire Bible is a book written by oppressed people longing for liberation. That's the entire under message of both the Old Testament and the New Testament. The book of Revelation has far too often been interpreted literally by conservative Christians. Many people will recognize last week, lots of conservative Christians thought the rapture was going to happen, and that was a big conversation. But Revelation is Jewish apocalyptic literature is the genre that it's in. And what is apocalyptic literature but people expressing their longings for God to liberate them from suffering? John, who wrote Revelation, was imprisoned on the island of Patmos while he was writing. And what Revelation is his desire, his prayer for Jesus to come back and do something different than what he did before, actually destroy the Roman Empire. Does that mean that that's who Jesus literally is? No. Does that mean Jesus is literally going to do that? No. But it makes sense that an oppressed people would long for God to come back and do something like that. What's different, though, is Christian nationalists who are now using that language are not oppressed people. They are the
No, no,
ones with the
yeah.
power.
That is so interesting that you said that because I saw a little something online with Joy Reid, and she said, "What are you guys so angry at? You have the White House, you have Congress, you have the Supreme. What are you so angry at?" And that's what I was going to ask you next. Retribution against what? Everyone who's not a Republican, everybody who's not a conservative. This is obviously very scary. I want to hear your thoughts about that. Why? Who are they after? Who are they seeking retribution against? Is it gay people? Is it transgender people? Is it all Democrats? Is it all? And why do they see us as godless?
Yeah. I think the
Tell me.
problem is there's a hyper dualism in Christian nationalist theology. There is only good versus evil. There is only God versus Satan. And if you are not for us, you are against us. And so that black and white way of viewing the world, one, is very comforting for the Christian nationalists in the pews because they get to see themselves as the good, chosen, righteous people, and everyone else who disagrees with us as the immoral, demonic, satanic people. And yet, it also is the very thing that fuels the kind of violence, not to take the Charlie Kirk incident in vain, but that kind of stuff emerges when you only see the world as good versus evil. And that's on any side of the aisle. Dualism, in that sense, I think, is always dangerous and doesn't acknowledge the complexities that are always at work that lead people to have different perspectives. And so Christian nationalists have to oppose anybody who doesn't believe what they believe, support what they support, because in their mind and in the theology they're hearing in church, everyone else is under the influence of Satan. And that's a scary way to view the world. And of course, that's going to lead people towards violence and very extreme acts because they literally think we are working for the devil and trying to take down this Christian kingdom that God is trying to set up.
This is really dangerous.
Yeah.
And it has become very powerful within the American political sphere. So how do they square so many of the policies of the far right in Congress, Supreme Court, and the White House, taking food away from the hungry, taking health care away from the sick, taking peace-building measures away. What is their response to this?
Yeah. I think in this one instance, they are very similar to some of the early pilgrims and Puritans that founded
Yeah,
America.
Calvinists who founded this country, they were a tough crowd.
Yeah. I mean, so they view themselves using the Jewish scriptures as a chosen people, given authority by God to set up a chosen kingdom. And they will draw on passages rather than looking to Jesus as the foundation of Christian nationalist ideology. If you listen to 90% of what they say at rallies or events, they're quoting from the Hebrew scriptures verses about conquering lands, verses about overcoming enemies, taking back what the enemy stole. It is this very the way I understand some of those passages in the Hebrew Bible is that's an earlier vision of spirituality and human evolution. And so there was a lot more dualism, there was a lot more eye for an eye 4,000 years ago than we have evolved to embrace today. And Christian nationalism is moving backwards and trying to place themselves as the chosen nation of God. And if you are the chosen nation of God and you're using the Hebrew Bible as your basis, well, then you can go conquer lands. You can go kill your enemies. You can go.
Well, that was no, the metaphysics of that, though, even within in Judaism, was never meant to be
Exactly.
that. I mean, that's even
Yeah.
a misinterpretation of what is meant to be within Judaism. The idea of the chosen people is people who chose God.
Yeah.
Many are called, but few are chosen, the Course in Miracles says, means many are called, but few care to listen. And the early monotheistic vision that emerged at that time from the Israelites. So let me ask you a question. You said earlier that they used to hold, the evangelicals used to hold, the U.S. Constitution is second to Scripture. They really held it high. They now think the Constitution, with its the primacy of religious pluralism, is somehow against what they stand for, so we have no further use for the U.S. Constitution?
Yeah. I mean, I think two things are at work there that made that shift happen. One, it is consistent with their theology to reject pluralism. Because if you really believe Christianity is the only religion that saves the souls of human beings, then to give freedom to false gods and people worshiping false religions is to help Satan. Again, it's very dualistic. But the other thing is, I think the reason we've seen this dramatic shift away from the Constitution, for instance, is simply the Donald Trump effect. It's simply because they've been waiting for 50 plus years to have this moment, and the leader that has emerged as the one leading this movement is one that's showing them that they don't actually need to follow laws, that they don't actually need to play within the systems. And so why would they? And that's a,
That's exactly
yeah,
right. I don't think he knows what the Constitution says. When he had that interview with Terry Moran from ABC, when he had the Declaration of Independence in his office, in the Oval Office, and Terry Moran said, "What does it mean to you?" It was so clear in that moment he's never read it.
yeah,
And I had read stories about how when he first became president and someone was explaining to him, we better go through the Constitution so you have the basics. And as the person was talking, it was reported that the president made this like 12-year-old like boring. He just
thing.
wants to do it his way. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so now let's talk about the international implications. One of the things that's so scary when the Islamists speak is Allah for all the world. And I'm not talking about Muslims, I'm talking about Islamists, just like they're, and I think it's so important that we understand. There's Muslim, which is one of the great religions, and then there's the Islamists. There's the Jews, and then there's the far-right Jewish supremacists, such as those we see in Israel. There are the Christians, and then there are these Christian nationalists. Every group has its extremists, every group has its shadow element, but the shadow element is not who that people is. And that shadow element exists because it exists within all humans, but it's important whether it's Jewish fundamentalism, Islamic fundamentalism, or Christian fundamentalism. Fundamentalism itself is deeply unspiritual.
Yeah.
because it is so deeply exclusive. Now, when the Islamists speak, Allah will be in charge, Islam will be in charge of the entire world, will be in charge of America, will be in charge of the entire world. Would the Christian nationalists look at international relations that way too, that they would like to impose this, this specifically what they call Christian, what you and I would really have a problem calling that Christian, but their view of the Christian nationalist perspective, do they want to impose that on the entire world, or do they just not talk about that?
Yeah, no, they explicitly do talk about that. And again, I mean, there is very little distinction between the Christian nationalist and the Islamist movement. I mean, it's an ironic thing because both of those movements internally would hate one another and say that the other is working for the enemy. But Christian nationalists want to see the world Christianized. The book of Revelation has a verse that says, the kingdoms of this world have become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Christ. The way they interpret that is America begins as this chosen nation that begins setting up a Christian theocracy. But America is the most powerful nation in the world. Why are they all here? Why are Christian nationalists focused on our nation? Because they're expecting that America would be able to have the influence to colonize and conquer the rest of the world. And they're actively doing it. I mean, I served on a board of the State Department about 8 years ago where we were getting reports of people in Texas, evangelical megachurches, sending people over to countries in Africa and the global south and training up leaders to be in alignment theologically and politically so that they could begin enacting similar policies across the globe. And we see, like, Uganda has the anti-gay bill that says has the death penalty for gay people based on supposed biblical interpretation. Like, this is a global movement, but right now it's hyper-focused on the United States because they have power.
Well, if you look at this, just how this would unfold over time, you'd be headed towards another serious crusades.
Yeah.
You know, how many people would die from that? And of course, the sadness to me, and I'm sure to you as well, is that if you look at the metaphysical meaning, the true spiritual meaning that all nations shall bow means everybody's going to fall in love with everybody.
Yeah.
That we'll just wake up in the morning and love everybody. That the age of any nation dominating will be done. It will be an age of collaboration rather than competition. It will be a world in which love is the bottom line, and loving each other is the bottom line. And within loving each other, that doesn't mean we all agree with each other all the time. Right? Because in a free society, we don't have to. So the idea that anyone should have to align not only with any religion, but with any particular interpretation of any religion, theoretically, we don't do that in America.
Yeah. And we don't do that, as you pointed out, as spiritual people. Both the book of Isaiah talks about the new heavens and the new earth where the lion lays down with the lamb. The book of Revelation says in chapter 21 that God will create a new heavens and new earth where we all stand together and there's no sickness, disease, or pain anymore. That's what we should all be aspiring to as people of faith. It's deeply embedded, not just in the Jewish and Christian traditions, but in virtually all of the
Absolutely, in all Abrahamic religions. And I think all of you would go beyond that to the Eastern religions and so forth. So let's now move on to what we're going to do about it.
Yeah.
I do believe, this is why I think people such as yourself are so important, and I have such great admiration. There's a group of you doing wonderful work, but we have a lot of catch up to do now. Because I think people of genuinely loving religious and spiritual persuasion do realize that we must rise now and speak into the political. I have felt this, obviously, as you well know, Brandan, for a very long time. And I do think that on the left, there has been, in my opinion, a kind of over-secularization of the language. The idea that only people on the right would be speaking into moral issues, to me, that's not how I grew up. The left and the right, the idea of morality, not in terms of doctrine or dogma, but in terms of truly righteous behavior, the right side of the political spectrum has always been more focused on individual behavior, personal behavior, and the left side of the spectrum has always been more focused on collective behavior. And so, for instance, economic justice is a moral issue.
Yeah.
Justice, thou shalt pursue. It's a moral issue. Environmental justice is a moral issue. Whether or not you invade a country that hasn't done anything to you should be seen as a moral issue. And I think that when the left became so, over the last few decades, so focused on making sure that our very languaging would be so devoid of any religious or spiritual perspective, unlike Bobby Kennedy Sr., unlike, God knows, unlike Martin Luther King Jr.,
Yeah.
unlike Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah.
I think that this really allowed for projections onto us that are absolutely untrue. We just hold that stuff in our hearts. And too many times, even people on the left, and I say this about myself, would be demeaned by people on the left and within the Democratic Party sphere for using language that, oh, we don't do that. And I think more and more conservatives, I'll tell you something I don't know if I've ever mentioned to you about conversations I would have on the campaign about abortion rights, right? Because I do believe that, women should have access to do with their bodies what they choose to do. It's a general concept. So I remember talking to women around the country who were, well, I don't call it pro-life, I call it anti-choice, but we would be talking about it, and they just heard me talk about spirituality and moral principles and so forth. And then the conversation about abortion would come up. And I would say to people, oh, I do believe it's a moral issue. I just think it's a private moral issue. I don't think the government should be weighing in on that. I don't think the government should have a say in that beyond some very obvious strictures. I think that this should be a woman's moral decision, and a man if he's making it with her. And I can't tell you how many times I got this response. Oh, okay, but you admit that it's a moral issue, right? And I would say, oh, absolutely, it's a moral issue. I just think it's a private moral issue, and the government should not weigh in. I can't tell you how many times people would say, oh, okay, well, that's fine. That's all I needed to hear. And I believe, would you agree with that? Do you agree with that, that the left and the Democratic Party almost looked at people such as you and me, like,
Yeah.
we don't go there. Like, well, who are you to say we don't go there? We're part of the we. So
Yeah.
tell me your thoughts about all that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a very clear evidence of a gradual conceding of religion to the right wing over the past 50 years. And what I see on my side in particular, in progressive Christian spaces even, is that most progressive people who go to church every single week and are really robust people of faith are afraid to bring religious language into political discourse
Right.
because they've been told you'll sound like the religious right, and we can't look like them.
Such a mistake, exactly.
Yeah.
One of the many, wrong on the part of the Democratic establishment that's just really happened over the last few decades.
Yeah. And as you said at your opening, a majority of this country is Christian, and beyond that, a majority of this country is religious. And it's been this
And
kind
believe
of
in God. 90% of the American people believe in God. So,
right, and it's that coastal elitism that we hear so often about of the liberal establishment that says, well, because we don't see a lot of religion in New York City or in Washington, D.C. or wherever, then the rest of the country must not also be religious. They must think that this is all nonsense. And the truth is, we lose people when we can't articulate our political
right.
positions with a moral and spiritual framework.
That's
And
right.
you mentioned, I think, James Tallarico, is a great voice right now who is showing how to be a Democrat and to say it with a religious and spiritual framework, and it's connecting with millions of people. I hope that that's a strategy we can use going forward.
Well, also, it's so exclusive to, we talk about a totalitarian bent on the right when people are told you have to say it this way. And on the left, we're just as guilty of that. You have to say it this way. We don't talk about this. Well, excuse me. We just say we don't, right? It's the essence of disallowing an actual big tent.
Yeah, absolutely. And this over controlling on the left is something, this policing of language in a way that has been happening so often has made a lot of people feel very afraid to even begin to express genuine opinions that are rooted in their religious beliefs. Again, I just got back from a 30-city tour across this country, and every single night when I got on stage to talk about these issues, people told me that they believe what they believe and support who they support because of their Christian faith, but they just are too afraid of the blowback they're going to get if they articulate that publicly. And we've got to stop that over-policing of language on the left and recognize that what makes us strong as progressive people is the diversity of our coalition, not the uniformity, which is, frankly, the Christian nationalist strategy to have a uniform theology and identity to build their movement upon.
Yeah. I mean, I know in my own life, because theologically I'm a pretty traditional girl, actually. And
Yeah.
woo-woo, all that stuff. It's really like, how many people are you planning to turn away this week? Are you hopeful? Do you think that the conversations are starting to change?
I am hopeful, not to sound like a broken record, but again, getting to go this summer and see communities in Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana gathering together and saying, we're coming together across our differences, divides, ethnicities, and we're going to resist what's happening locally. And I've become more convinced than ever that right now what people need to do is become hyper local and to ask, what can you do in your community to stop the injustices that are being enacted? Because most of us don't have the ability on the national scale to combat whatever's coming down from the White House. But if we all, as progressive people of faith, start organizing in our individual neighborhoods and communities and start joining and building coalitions, that's the very movement Jesus started. That's how Jesus began his work. And that is how I believe we actually topple an authoritarian empire. It's not through seeking to wage a violent revolution. It's actually through doing the work on the ground. And I do see people doing that in every corner of this country.
And prayer, because
Yeah,
we need a miracle. Prayer. I mean,
more than ever.
it's too many people don't realize that among white Americans, the abolitionists, among white abolitionists, I mean, the entire movement emerged from early evangelical churches in New Hampshire.
Yeah,
Women's suffragists, many of the leaders were religious Quakers. And of course, Dr. King. Dr. King was a Baptist preacher. He said it's time for a new dimension of love to be injected into the veins of human civilization. Can you imagine what, somebody would be, told if they were to say this today? Although certain men could say it and certain, yeah, but
yeah,
you know what I'm saying. So the issue is, of course, then, that when more progressive Christian or any progressive religious perspectives begin to express themselves within the left and within the Democratic Party, for the party and the left to make sure that no smirks are left on their faces, rolled eyes, and so forth, because that's a turnoff. I mean, I know I experienced it and have experienced it, like such a demeaning of faith. Well, if I feel that way, I can imagine how some conservatives would feel who might otherwise have been very more left-leaning in their actual political perspectives. All right, so we have a lot of work ahead of us, right? How can
we
we
do.
support you, Brandon, in the amazing work that you're doing articulating these things? Tell people where they can find you and how they can be part of the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, well, thank you again. And I would say what I'm doing in this next year, we're launching on another 35 city tour across the rest of the states I didn't visit. And it's around my new book called Queer and Christian. But that book's not actually just about how to be LGBT and Christian. It's about how to re-envision a Christianity that meets a moment like this. And so if folks want to head over to my website, brandanrobertson.com, you can see the list of 35 places I'll be in 2026. And it's a really great opportunity, again, just to see local churches of progressive people coming together and saying, let's do something about this moment rather than sitting in despair and anxiety. So,
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, once again, if they're shouting, we can't afford to just whisper. Not
exactly.
a moment for that. Well, your voice is very loud in the best of ways, so I wish you the best. Thank you very, very much, and I look forward not just to our friendship going forward, but always that we can work together
Yes.
to increase the resonance of what we see as a universal spiritual message.
Thank you for the light you bring too.
God bless. Thank you, Brandon. Okay, everybody. I think that these are important conversations that we're all having. We can't just say, well, let's leave religion out of the conversation. We have to say, but what is the actual universal spiritual theme at the heart of all the great religious and spiritual systems? Right now, so much of the religious conversation in the world is being overtaken by fundamentalist aspects of those religions. That's has happened before on this planet, and I don't think we ever thought to see it the way we're seeing it now in the Western world, particularly in the United States, but we are. So let's find, for those of us who who do have a religious bent or a spiritual bent, what is the actual message? And you'll find that that message is love. That message is mercy. That message is forgiveness. That message is justice. That message is societies in which we take care of children, in which we help the poor, in which we feed the sick, in which we bring medicine to those who need it, in which we build peace. That can't just be, oh yeah, there's that. We can't peripheralize that. We can't make that just quaint stuff. That's got to be the real hardcore message, which is we're here to love one another. And when we make our purpose on this earth anything different than that, literally all hell breaks loose. So, love you, Brandan,
Love you
and
too.
to all of you who have listened. Thank you so much.